What search engines do we use? More of our thoughts on data removal services, cars leaking private data, stock brokerage platforms, how we learn about technical topics, and Apple Music alternatives. Welcome to the Q&A number 190, where we answer questions from all of you amazing patrons who allow us to bring this podcast to you for free every week. You can view and join these questions every week on patreon.com/surveillancepod. And now when you join the tier that gets you these questions, you can also join our private Signal community. So without further ado, first question from Apricot. What search engines do we both use and why? I'm still on Brave Search. There are a couple browsers that I still use DuckDuckGo for, but that's about it. So it's mostly Brave Search, like 95% of the time, and then DuckDuckGo. And then I'd say maybe like 1 in 10 of my Brave Search searches go through Google with like a Google Bang, because Brave Search just can't do the search well enough, or I need like local results. And I'm always in a private window in my browser that I'm using Brave Search on. So it's okay if I use Google here and there. I kind of use Brave Search more out of principle, even though I don't really have like an inherent privacy concern with the way my browser's configured with Google.
I also use Brave because I don't want to support Google, and I don't like that a lot of the other options out there are just meta search engines. Like DuckDuckGo is just Bing, Start Page is just Google. Cerex is pretty good because it draws from a variety of different engines. I don't know. I'm really happy with Brave. It gives me pretty good results. The only time I use DuckDuckGo is for videos to find images, because Brave image search is still not quite where I want it to be. These next two questions we're basically going to combine because they're kind of the same question, but Sauron Doe and Rasta both say basically what are our thoughts on the most recent research about data removal stuff, which that was our headline story in the podcast this past week. So if for some reason you are watching this and you have not seen this week's podcast, definitely go check that out.
Also, we probably already left most of our thoughts in the VIP for that for the patrons. So you patrons probably already got an answer to that, but we should probably leave a public answer here too.
Well, actually, everyone probably got an answer for that, because with the headline story, I try to leave it a little more stuff in, just because, you know, it's the headline story. People want to hear our thoughts about that one. But just as a quick recap, I think our thoughts were basically like, it's disappointing, but at the same time, it's a tough spot because asking people to do manual data removal is not realistic for most people, especially like quote unquote normies who, you know, have families and jobs, and like, you know, it's a lot to ask of people. So Henry's still really on the fence and thinking it over. I'm probably just going to be a lot more strict about following up and making sure that the data I want gone is gone. Specifically for Henry, this says, do the results of Delete Me make Techlore reconsider your recommendation? And if so, which services would you recommend? Do you even still recommend them?
Yeah, well, first, I'm still waiting to hear back from them. I already said that in the last episode. So I reached out to one of their team members, and then a different team member said, hey, you didn't reach out to us, even though you said publicly you did. And I said, well, I did. I reached out to a different team member, and it's messy. So I haven't heard back from them yet. But no, it doesn't look good for them. And so it's very unlikely that they're going to stay as a recommendation. I'm already kind of wanting to take it off just out of precaution right now. The only reason I haven't is that using the service doesn't actually jeopardize you more yet, if that makes sense. So in the past, when we've instantly delisted something, it's because like, oh no, if you still use this service, it's because there's a really big concern. But I'm not going to recommend something that's not going to actually help people. So I think out of precaution, we might remove it. Either way, it seems like easy opt-outs is the way to go if I am going to recommend anything. But it's kind of a crapshoot right now, to be honest. I don't really know what to do. And Jonah and I are probably going to have a Techlore Talks on it to see what Jonah's thoughts are on this as well, while I'm still processing things and waiting for a response from Delete Me. I think if I am going to move to a different service, it would be easy opt-outs based on this research, unless I just choose not to use any service. But using no service just doesn't feel good to me, because then I have to go all in on manual, and I have to continually maintain the manual route, which I don't want to have to do either. And easy opt-outs was almost as effective over time as manual. If any of you have thoughts or suggestions and you are a customer of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I've said this on the website for a long time. So if you go to my data removal page, I said there's two main ways to go about this, the automated way and the manual way. The automated way is easiest and will likely work for the vast majority of people with low threat models. You can go with a service like one of the ones listed here. For those who wish to do so manually, Michael Basil offers a free workbook, and I don't know how to pronounce their name, Yale Gruer offers the Big Ass Data Broker opt-out list, and I link to both of those. For those with some time to spare, not a lot, I recommend a mix of both approaches. An automated service can be a great way to get the bulk of the removal done, and then you can come back a few months later after all the easy stuff has been removed and check for remnants. I'm not really planning to change anything. I'm probably just going to update the page to contain this research.
I do think the other thing is, even if you go through an automated service or you go manual, you want to use the window of time where your data is theoretically removed to actually prevent data from going back out, which is still probably the most effective thing you can do, is actually stop whatever's leaking your data in the first place. So that hasn't changed. If you're somebody who's focused on that, definitely still continue doing that, because that's something that's always good to do. All right, next question is from Tasteful Flatulence. There's been a lot of talk about how much data modern cars leak. Could something more radical be proposed, like a Faraday garage? It would be wildly expensive and would leak info all the way to your house. And some sort of signal jamming possible, blocking data flows one drives around. Does anything like this exist? I know I've made fun of this take before, so when I'm saying this, it's not because I think it's the best take, but I think if you're considering these extreme scenarios, your time might be better worth going into maybe buying an older car that just doesn't have it in the first place, or upgrading an old car or getting a modern car. But like you said, it's probably the easiest thing to do is just take out the cell chip of your car. That's something that you can reasonably find in most modern vehicles, even in things like Teslas, which notoriously have a lot of data collection. You should be able to still find a computer and take out the SIM card, but there's very limited documentation on how to do that, and there are some other considerations you need to make before you do that, because a lot of functionality will be cut out from the car.
I also just want to add on to that at least some signal jammers are illegal in the US, so that could definitely be a bad road to go down, no pun intended. And also, truthfully, it's kind of a dick move, because unless you really program it just right to only cover the area around your car, you're probably going to hit the cars next to you as well. And if I'm sitting at a long red light and my music stops playing because the guy next to me has a signal jammer, I'm obviously not going to know, because that's such a weird thing. I'm just going to be like, why did my music stop? But it's very inconvenient and annoying, and I would prefer you didn't.
Some of the stuff I read online is very extreme, and people really over-engineer and overcomplicate some pretty simple things sometimes. And I think this is a good example of, like, if you're this concerned about the data collection, the current options are buy a used car or take out the SIM card on a newer car, essentially. Unless you're just going to do the basic opt-outs, which honestly sometimes are pretty effective depending on the car manufacturer.
Apparently they're really effective. I mentioned the Byron Tao book. He mentions that toward the end is all he had been doing was the simple stuff, like changing the settings on his app, deleting some of his apps on his phone, stuff like that. And he hired somebody to do like just a quick search of him in actual data broker databases, not like OSINT. Like, this person had actual access, and he paid them to be like, hey, can you look me up? And they didn't find him. So again, I'm sure they could have done OSINT and found him, but in the actual data broker stuff, they're like, yeah, you're not there, man. Apparently simple works sometimes. Great book. Totally recommend it. Our next question comes from someone who gave us a pronunciation guide. It's Le Corbusier, which I still don't know what that means. But you say that recently you have been trying to find options for privacy respecting stock brokerage platforms. First off, do you think this is an actual issue? On the one hand, they are probably required to collect information, but on the other side, they usually require phone number and email. I don't know how much data is sold by these platforms and would prefer to keep this info from being tied to a phone number. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts? So first of all, I want to be that guy and say, at least here in the US, general personal finance advice is don't play individual stocks. You should do like a S&P 500 index funds, mutual funds. I think those are similar. Anyways, but you could also be talking about that. Maybe you're signing up for a brokerage to open an index account. Either way, do I think this is an actual issue? Yes and no. I wouldn't put the app on your phone, especially for investing, because ideally you should just drop your investments in there and just let them grow and just check on it a couple times a year. Like, it shouldn't be something you're opening every time you're waiting for the elevator. You are correct. KYC laws, they do have to know your identity by federal law. Ostensibly, this is to fight fraud or whatever. But as far as things that aren't identifying, like, they're going to need your name, they're going to need your date of birth, they're going to need your social. Do they need your address? No. Do they need your SIM phone number? No. Do they need your direct email instead of a simple login alias? No.
Legally, address actually probably is required.
Okay, you might be right about that one. Talk to an actual lawyer. But you know what I mean? Like, try to find those things that it's like, you don't really need it. Because, yeah, they probably are, at very least, throwing it into some third-party database from a CRM tool or cloud storage, or, you know, we just talked about Move It this week. Like, yeah, I would definitely try to obfuscate that as much as possible. But you are going to have to give up some information in order to comply with the law. And we generally don't encourage breaking the law around here.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Just obfuscate what you can that's within legal means, but you're ultimately doing something that is directly tied to your personal identity, and that's kind of the reality of the situation. And I will say, I think smart investing can still incorporate individual stocks. don't go all in on stocks, but
yeah, exactly. If you want to play a little bit here and there and it's something you're familiar with, sure, go for it. But definitely don't try to be, even Warren Buffett tells you not to try and be Warren Buffett.
my take on investing is if you know something really well, then stocks aren't as risky. So for example, like if you were around in 2012 and you heard about the rumors of AMD's processors coming out soon, then to you, it's not risky at all to invest in AMD a little bit because in your head, they couldn't have been in a worse spot then. So even if the CPUs were a flop, they couldn't have gone lower because they were going for $5 or $6 a share back then. I think that if you know an industry well, it's less risky. But this isn't a financial advice channel, so you should talk to someone else who knows what they're talking about. All right, David Johnson has a question here. What types of sources have you found most useful for learning about specifics of various hardware and software subjects in order to better understand how the underlying technology that you're trying to leverage in your quest for better personal privacy and security works? We've been asked pretty similar questions. So it's going to vary a lot depending on what we're trying to learn or what we need to learn. Typically, just our roles of needing to actually dig through these services and dig through these tools directly requires us to start learning more things in the process. So for example, in order for us to understand why one VPN might be better than another, this VPN offers this new feature that we've never heard of before, and then it forces us to have to learn about that feature and how it works on an underlying level. I don't know about Nate, but on my end, the interviews I do with people, like experts in very specific niche fields, a lot of those individuals, I'm asking them actual questions that I'm wondering about too, and I learn from those people. I know something Nate and I have both talked about in the past is we kind of have a nice luxury where we can always kind of reach out to any expert when we need a question about something. That's something that we have a big luxury of having. Like, there's almost no technical question that I can see that I can't ping someone who can probably not either directly give me an answer or give me a secondary answer pretty easily. So I'd say those are the main things. I have done a couple courses, but like I took a ICS2 cybersecurity course, and I've done some very light courses that don't have certificates. So I still try to do a little bit of learning and reading as well. But those are more for broad knowledge, and it's less of like the specific things that we talk about. So that's it on my end. I don't know Nate's situation.
I don't really have time to sit down and dedicate myself to learning these things. I would love to. In lieu of that time, kind of like you said, a lot of what I learn comes from either interviews I've done myself, interviews I listen to, like I listen to your podcast when you put that out. I listen to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, and he does every other week. One's an interview, one's news. One's an interview, one's news. I think there's a couple others I listen to that are tech focused that talk about this stuff. Darknet Diaries, he mentions some of this stuff and breaks some of it down. A lot of what I learn is just kind of incidental along the way, or like you said, somebody will launch a new feature and they'll explain how it works, or I will get curious and go learn how it works. YouTube videos, again, take them with a grain of salt. How qualified is that person? Or if you are technical, white papers. Just read the actual white paper on a product, a service, research. Those are kind of my plans for one of these days when I have time. I do have a bunch of digital cybersecurity textbooks that I bought. One of these days, again, when I have time, I want to sit down and actually read those. And they'll probably be a little outdated by then, but the general principles should be true. Like the exact menu layouts and stuff should have changed. But there's definitely a lot of ways out there that don't require you to like get into a structured course or a college class. Just some can-do-it attitude and a good internet connection will get you pretty far.
Nate's telling us all to pull each other up by our bootstraps. Can-do attitude. Back in my day, we all had a good can-do attitude.
Hey, back in my day, the internet sounded like a transformer when it was connecting. Silence, child. Our last question comes from Yaya, who says, I'm thinking of switching away from Apple Music because of all the tracking and to decentralize from big tech. Are there any good open source options out there that provide all the music you'd expect from big tech music / streaming apps, preferably one that's fair to the artists? So definitely no Spotify, not that that's open source anyways. Let me start with that. The answer is no, just point blank. The best you're going to find is maybe some front ends like Cider, which I think has actually kind of been deprecated and now it's like a paid service. You could use like YouTube with a VPN or like a uBlock Origin, Brave, something like that. Apple Music, unfortunately, is kind of the best one in terms of privacy and maybe not in terms of fair to the artist. I think Deezer technically pays the most to the artist. Or no, is it Tidal? Yeah, I think Tidal technically pays the most to the artist, but I don't know what their library looks like. Honestly, I think Apple Music is about as good as you're going to get unless you want to like go out and buy the CDs and rip them and manually build your own streaming app. But then the drawback there is you don't discover new music, which is a big thing for me. I love to discover new bands, new songs, new releases. But if you're really plugged in and you're keeping up with all that stuff and you don't need music apps to curate them with an algorithm, because you got to understand these open source options you're talking about, to do things legit and to be fair to the artist, they're going to have to license the music. So they're going to have to charge money, and they're probably going to have to charge a lot more than $10 a month. I don't see a way that it's really a sustainable business model, to be honest. And then just to address it, you said, if I find an alternative, is there a way to port the music I've added to my library? No, that's not a thing. I've heard that there are scripts where basically you can sign into your existing streaming service and your other streaming service, and it'll automatically like go find the songs you currently have in the new service. I've heard some of them are pretty good. Personally, I don't trust signing into stuff. Like, even though I know I could like change my password or whatever later, I don't know. I would rather, and I did this, I think last year I moved from Spotify to Apple, and I manually went through and found every single song and re-added them. And it took several days. I don't know. I guess maybe that's like the data removal thing. That may not be feasible for everyone, but I don't have one I can vouch for, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I feel like what I'd add here is you're trying to do a lot of things. You're trying to avoid tracking in your app. You're trying to decentralize from big tech, but you also want to support artists in some way. And I feel like a lot of those things are actually at odds with each other. So it's going to be hard to get all those things down. I do think Apple Music is a pretty decent middle ground of all of those. And where it falls the shortest is going to be decentralizing from big tech. But it's going to be pretty light on the tracking, and it's going to give decently to the artists. But you also talk about, is there a way to port the music? And there really isn't if you're using these services that actually directly contribute to the artists. So, another alternative is, but then you still can't get away from big tech. I was going to suggest, you could always, like Nate said, just go on YouTube and listen to things. And if you have your ad blocker off, then it's still going to artists a little bit, but that's even worse, I would say, from big tech than Apple Music would be, because now you're actually contributing to the ad industry as well, which is kind of its own problem. So I think that maybe a good middle ground here is, find a way to directly support the artists you care about, and then maybe find some other solution to avoid your other issues. So maybe find a way to get music locally is another option. If you download, you can still buy music on iTunes. That's not something people talk about, but you can still buy music on iTunes. You can still download it as an MP3, I believe, and then load it to whatever open source player you want to use. So if you really want to cough up the money and support the artist, that's how you're going to have to do it.
There's a website that's reasonably popular called Bandcamp that lets you download the music in virtually any format. It's hit or miss. Like, I've seen some like, you're definitely not going to find like Taylor Swift on there, but I've seen some reasonably bigger artists who are on Bandcamp. And there's definitely a lot of independent artists. But yeah, on that note, just as a musician, the best way you can support the artist, roughly in order: number one, buy the CD the first week it comes out, or pre-order it. Physical, digital, doesn't matter. Just buy it the first week it comes out. Number two, go to shows. And number three, while you're at a show, buy some merch or a shirt or whatever, or buy drinks at the bar, because the band usually gets a split of the bar.
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to leave this with, it's a really weird off topic, but I think it ties into this because I've been struggling with something else that's similar here, is optimizing like my food. So I am trying to eat in a way that reduces waste, so as close to zero waste as possible, is as ethical as possible, and has the least amount of carbon footprint, but is still convenient. I start listing out all these requirements, and the reality is I can't do all of them. So I need to kind of pick my core 2 or 3 and really focus on those, and then I can look at the other ones and see where I can kind of make minor improvements. And I think if I were you, you have 3 things that kind of go at odds with each other, and I would try to maybe focus on your 2 main ones. And I think that might help you out here as a starting point. Start with 2, and then if you can kind of slowly over time work on that 3rd one, see what you can do with that 3rd one over time. So this could be a situation where you might be able to actually get away from big tech and the tracking by getting music from weird places, and then you actually have to go out of your way, and it's still inconvenient for you to still support your artists through exterior ways. Just something to think about. What search engines do we use? Sounds like Brave Search is popular. Definitely leave your search engines that you enjoy down in the comments. More of our thoughts on data removal services. Would also like your thoughts on that. cars leaking private data, stock brokerage platforms, how we learn about technical topics, and Apple Music alternatives. Thanks for tuning in and asking your questions. We couldn't do this Q&A without questions, so we really appreciate them, and we love answering them and engaging with all of you. And we also want to thank you all for also supporting our podcast, keeping it free for everybody else, and all of you listening who are not already supporting us can be one of those people, and you also get access to a few other things on Patreon at patreon.com/surveillancepod. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.